All right, it's 6:01. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, welcome, and thank you for attending. My name is Kathleen Landman. I am with the Office of Education at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and I'm an educational program specialist at the USPTO. And this is sort of my second act. I spent many years in the classroom, and one of the things that I loved to do when I was in the classroom was Invention Education. So I'm super excited for the panel tonight that you're going to get to hear from, who really have been working on this for a while. It's a great and amazing panel of presenters that you're going to see tonight. All right, so the presenters tonight represent Invented, and USPTO has been a part of the Invented network from its inception. We believe in the power of Invention Education to influence educators and learners from all backgrounds. We are very happy to welcome our friend, Erin Tochen, as our special guest for the K-12 webinar, and we look forward to the work she and her colleagues will share with us this evening. So, Erin, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. The microphones are disabled for viewers. They're only enabled for the presenters. But we would love to have your questions, and we'll stop periodically to try to answer some of those questions for you. All right, Erin.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thanks so much to USPTO for inviting the Invented community to share who we are and the work that we do to support Invention Education. We do have a slide deck, so Kathleen, when you are able to, we can pull that up now. And just an additional quick note to USPTO, we are so appreciative of our relationship with you and thrilled to be here this evening. And a huge welcome to everyone joining us this evening and afternoon. Thanks for being here. As Kathleen mentioned, my name is Erin Tochen. I'm the Network Director for Invented, which is an initiative of the Lemelson Foundation. The Lemelson Foundation supports inventors and inventions around the world. And Invented is a network of people and organizations building the field of K-12 invention education. Next slide, please. So I know that a number of you joining us this evening are learning about and deep into invention education already. At Invented, we think about invention education as both a practice and a community. So there are a number of ways to highlight invention education, but in a nutshell, it's a highly flexible, cross-curricular, student-centered approach to bringing traditional STEM learning to life through hands-on problem solving. It focuses on problem identification through empathy, questioning, and community engagement. It leads students on a journey to collaboratively problem solve using research, developing prototypes, and then ultimately, ideally, resulting in a unique solution. So we know that not everyone who has had an invention education experience goes on to have a successful invention, but we do believe that everyone can be and should be inventive. Having invention skills and mindset are critical for young people to be future problem solvers in their own lives and to create new solutions to problems they see in their communities and around the world. Next slide. For many teachers, out-of-school time educators, and others, many of you joining us this evening, we know that very likely you might be exploring invention education kind of on your own. But as I previously mentioned, invention education also has a community that we call Invented. So Invented is a coalition of K-12 educators, program providers, researchers, government agencies, funders, and others who are building this field. Our primary goal is to cultivate the inventive mindset that we know exists in everyone. So we connect throughout the year to learn from one another, to share resources and share progress and success. We also work to build awareness for invention education so that more educators can learn about it, try it out, and engage their students in invention experiences. And everyone is welcome in this community. We're a little over 5 years old. We've grown from 26 organizations to a coalition of over 800 people, many of whom are just curious and learning about invention education on our website. But we have a very passionate and committed group who are deeply engaged in building this field. And I'm fortunate tonight to be joined by several of these passionate and committed leaders in the invention education community. Next slide, please. So let's get to why you joined today's call. On today's webinar, I am joined by a truly all-star team of researchers and practitioners. They're going to introduce themselves as they go, and you'll have a chance to interact and share your insights and ask questions. Together, we're going to explore some of the current research around failure, inventive identity, and what we call the inventive mindset. So we're going to start by hearing from a teacher, Ed Hernandez, and a program provider, Alaina Rutledge, on how they support the ups, downs, and breakthrough moments of an invention education experience. And they might even reflect on their own breakthrough moments teaching invention education. Next slide. I will now hand it over to Ed. Take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to try and keep it on schedule. And really what I'm going to try and do is share a little bit of the story of our path towards invention education and how that has become part of what we do at my particular program at Tustin High School. Next slide, please. So Tustin High School is, for those of you that are familiar with the Southern California region, about 10 minutes south of Disneyland. We're a kind of middle of the road Title I school, about comprehensive high school to about 2,100 students. And for me, it's a second career. I started graduating in electrical engineering from UC Irvine. I worked in the electronics industry for about 13 years. And I tell my students that I didn't want to make money, so I switched over to teaching. Most adults get the joke. Most of my students think I'm a big idiot whenever I say that. So I've been doing this now for this, I believe this is my 20th year. Time flies when you're having fun. Next slide, please. So even though I've been teaching a STEM curriculum since 2010, the real breakthrough and kind of like the shift in mindset came about when I took a group of students to MIT as part of the Lemelson MIT Invention Grant. And this, so that's kind of a little bit of the story that I'll be sharing. So that's a group of kids you see on the right. And how we switched our thinking really is, when you look at that diagram, almost everybody's seen this in some form or another. There's 8 steps, 10 steps, 12 steps. Sometimes this one happens to have 12, and it's the traditional engineering design process. And after we started working with this, I really thought, hey, you can scratch out design and just put invention, and it lends itself pretty darn well. With the most important and most difficult aspect of what we found out is to define the problem. Because if you were to put a bunch of people in the same room and say, hey, I'll see you tomorrow, invent me something. It is really, really difficult to kind of come up with inventions in a vacuum without a specific goal. You have a need, a want, something that you're going to have to address, right? You need a problem to solve, etc. Next slide. So one of the things that, as we were trying to figure out what it was that we wanted to do, there's always, clean water for Africa. Well, we didn't want to go global on the scale. We wanted to be closer to our community, and that's kind of always what we try and tell people, because the closer it is to you, the more engaged your students are going to be, the more time they're going to be able to spend on it, et cetera. So one of the things that we saw is one day we were walking out of our classroom is look down on the floor, on the sidewalks and the walkways is all the individual pieces of chewing gum litter. I guarantee by the time I'm done with this, you're going to walk out of your building, you're going to walk out of your school, and you're going to see, oh my God, there is an awful lot of chewing gum on the floor. And we weren't quite sure. We knew it was a problem with our school, but in order to really verify that, I broke the school up into quadrants. I divided the students and sent them on their way to count each and every single piece of chewing gum. We came back with over 20,000 individual pieces of chewing gum litter on our campus. That's when we had kind of like the big aha moment. Was like, oh gosh, this is really a problem. We need to address it. That became the center of our invention process. From there, it's like, well, we don't know anything other than everybody chews it and not everybody throws it away correctly. You see in the middle, part of our research was going over to Home Depot, buying every possible cleaning agent that we can get our hands on, including, see on here, like, peanut butter and oil and anything that could possibly remove gum, and went ahead and tried to remove it. Turns out that it is much easier said than done. We had a group of students work with a chemistry teacher to try and see, hey, does it really break this down? It turns out gum is really, it's a polymer. It's a petroleum-based polymer. It's plastic with a little bit of flavoring. And once that flavoring goes away, we just throw it out. And it also happens to be the #2 litter problem in the world next to cigarette butts. So it wasn't just us. And they say that in London, you can spot where the pubs are just by looking at the sidewalks. It doesn't need to be a sign outside of the door. It's just that, I guess, chewing gum and beer doesn't mix, and it all happens to be thrown away. I mean, thrown out right on the sidewalk. But another thing the kids found is that you can't just spray something on it and hopefully hope that it disappears. We need abrasive. We need to be able to scrub it off, and we need to heat it. And in some cases, these things have been baked on for years. And so it's not just a matter of spraying something on. And you see a picture of Eric with a heat gun and a brush adapter and a drill to try and test things out. Next, please. So as we started figuring things out, we decided, okay, we have a 3-step approach. And what you see on the picture on the left is that's Lee Esterbrooks, our Chief Invention Officer at the Lemelson MIT program, with an incredible look on her face. I love this picture because she's seeing Brendan and Eric here. They're showing, hey, this is our 3-pronged approach. And she's looking at us, oh my God, these kids are in over their head. This is never going to work. It looks so that I love this picture. The picture on the far right is when you see the kids working. I think this is on a Saturday, and it was because I see some of the food on the table. The fact that this was a problem close to them, they just walk right out the door and see the problem and start testing. That's really engaged them. So I didn't have an issue bringing kids after school, before school, during Saturdays and whatnot. It just became something they wanted to do. The middle picture is kind of how when things started taking shape. We took the shell of an old vacuum cleaner and thought, hey, this has got wheels, it's got a handle. It could possibly house all 3 things. As a lot of you know, also invention is an iterative process, right? Just like the design, and we started the loop over and over again. All of my students are proficient in 3D modeling with SolidWorks and 3D printing and whatnot. So you see here on the table a good chunk of what we did for 3D printing, and I'm glad I took this picture because, my God, it is an incredible amount. But it just shows, the refinement from one version to the other, right? Next slide, please. This here happens to be the final version of the device that we came up with. On the left, you see the SolidWorks 3D rendering. That's the computer-generated version of what we did. Everything was modeled on the computer before we built it. And on the right is the real deal. And it's amazing how close these things came out. On the right side, you see this white bottle. That is the dispenser or the container for the chemical agent that we decided to work on and work with. Below that red cylinder, that is a drill motor that was kind of wired in to serve as our rotating brush, and that's a metal brush at the end of that. We also found out that traditional heat guns don't blow enough air, and traditional blow dryers don't blow hot enough, so we invented our own little super heat gun. So this thing was amazing. It was pretty cool. Then we have a power supply with electronics and the little control thing on top, so you can start with the spray and then with the heat and then with the scrubber at the end. Amazingly, it did work. Oh, one thing you don't see on here, we took the guts of a Swiffer jet for spraying the stuff onto the concrete, and that worked out pretty well. So amazingly, it worked, and we were able to display it, which was amazing. The kids, once they saw that, oh my God, we got this thing to work and we're solving a problem, it shifted their mindset, and it shifted my mindset because we set out to solve a problem and we invented little things along the way, not just the big invention, but the fact that it was a large accomplishment. Next slide, please. Oops, one too many. So all of us have grown up in classrooms to the left, right? Where just rows and rows of seats. And imagine trying to come up with an invention, anything creative, real world application in that environment. It's darn near impossible as far as I'm concerned. On the right is a picture of my shop. I am lucky in that I have this little environment, but more and more we have workspaces, we have maker spaces, we have little closets even. It doesn't really matter so long as you get out of the classroom and start applying some of the stuff that we've been teaching over the last 12 years. Next, please. And that's one of the things that I say. Historically, we've been teaching our students for 12 years how to hammer, but we never teach them how to build anything, how to apply all of the math, all of the science, all of the English, etc. I don't know about you guys, but when I was going to high school, I was always wanted to ask, when am I ever going to use this stuff? And I didn't use the word stuff, right? When am I ever going to use this? And what's cool is when we set out to solve a problem, we get to use all of these tools that are part of our curriculum, right? Whether it be high-tech curriculum, whether it be electronics, 3D printing, 3D modeling, lasers, etc., or just traditional math, pencil and paper, and English, because we need to really be able to communicate what it is that we're talking about. Michael Collins from the Apollo 11 program famously said that the E in STEM should stand for English. If you can't communicate what it is that you've invented, nobody really cares. Do we invent all every day, all day? No, but it has shifted our mindset so that every day in my classroom, we're looking to solve a problem, a need, or a want. And that has made all the difference in the world. I think I'm right on time. So I'm going to shift it over to Alaina, and then we'll have room for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. I cannot wait until that gum removal device is on the market. And more importantly, it was really impressive to hear how you changed the mindset of those learners through that project. That was a great example of a real world challenge and an authentic learning experience. I'm Alaina Rutledge. I'm a researcher and educator for the National Inventors Hall of Fame. I'm in my 19th year with the Hall of Fame. More than 250,000 students experienced our invention programs this past summer, and nearly 25,000 teachers taught our invention program. So we've spent some time intentionally documenting our learnings, and I love that I get to share them with all of you today. So thank you for that opportunity. Most of our work has been through our flagship program, Camp Invention, but we do have other programs too. So we serve students pre-K through high school, and the United States Patent and Trademark Office has been an incredible partner for us over the years, and we're so thankful to them and for hosting us on this call today. They've really allowed us to dig deep into this field over the last 50 years, and they enable all of us to equip children and teachers as they go through their invention journey. They provide excellent resources. I've been in the field of education since 2000, and like all of you, I've seen some really monumental shifts, and we know we need all the support we can get. At the National Inventors Hall of Fame, we've been researching what we think schools need right now. We've spent a lot of time analyzing the responses of hundreds of teachers throughout the country, listening to district superintendents, and most importantly, we've been asking the learners themselves. So on this next slide that's coming up, you will see how the National Inventors Hall of Fame applies inspiration from the world's greatest inventors, the National Inventors Hall of Fame inductees, to empower the next generation of innovators through STEM, through intellectual property, through inspiring experiences that build confidence and creativity. And that's independent of what career a child might eventually take, because we believe these skills and this pattern of thought is really powerful, even if a child doesn't grow up to become an innovator. When we ask inventors to tell us their story, we hear about risk. We hear about the tolerance for ambiguity. We hear about persistence and the social emotional side of inventing most often. And the National Inventors Hall of Fame inductees, they give us these really fascinating stepping stones. And these are, I feel, new trails and experiences that we can emulate and give to young learners. And so having had that fortunate opportunity to interview these prolific and diverse inventors, I feel it's important to summarize what is that collective story. And that's here what you see on the screen. And what also we should say, tangential, is that invention is a very personal journey. Even though we can pull out these common themes and give students these experiences that replicate what the inventors who've changed our world have done, we know that the skills are beyond just equipping them to be an inventor, that these skills are truly the skills that all kids need to be able to be problem solvers in this generation. There's a lot of problems that are, new to us in 2023. And we know by the time our students graduate and finish their academic career, there will be even more challenges for them to solve. And so looking at how do we help do that as educators, it's important for us to not take for granted being so close to the source of innovation. So the relationship we have with the men and women in the Hall of Fame, our inductees, also the United States Patent and Trademark Office, it's a huge opportunity to bring the source of that novelty directly to learners nationwide. And there's a tertiary effect that we found that happens. So these experiences really impact teachers too. So when we used a BI tool to create this mindset or web of valuable skills, like you see on the screen, and find this collective of our inventor story, it's important to see beyond it as just a skill set, but also an experience. You're going to hear in a few minutes from Dr. Garner about this commonality. And we found that a component of a student's invention identity is ingenuity in solution seeking, and this sort of replicates the findings in this research. There are some specific skills and identities that we feel are crucial for invention. So on this slide, you're seeing sort of the what, and on the next slide, if you can advance to the next slide, you're going to see the where. So invention education is truly multifaceted. It's very useful beyond just inventing. As you know, invention education involves project-based learning, prototyping, entrepreneurship, building together, collaboration, and it has this really unique ability to authentically cultivate and cater to students in an individual way. I personally feel that invention education skills are really helpful. And also, I strongly believe we do not need to carve out yet another siloed hour in the school day to teach these skills. Rather, I believe, and a lot of my colleagues and probably a lot of you on this call believe, that they should be embedded into the experiences that children already are receiving in schools. So this is not yet another thing to teach, but instead invention education can empower learning across all subject areas. If you wouldn't mind to move to the next slide. We've made a huge investment in formal research over the past 30 years. The people on this call, the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and many of you who have colleagues that maybe aren't joining us tonight. But I want to share this resource. So in your resources on this call, you'll find a document with a list of proofs of invention education. Recently, if you call recently the last 3 years, we've looked at equitable methods to support diverse learners. The Office of Education at the USPTO does an incredible job supporting diversity and equity. And I want to give a subtle shout out to my friend Paul and Joyce and their teams who are here, because they've been doing a phenomenal job providing advocacy to support all learners. And using Joanna's tool, we can kind of see the findings and the differences between boys and girls. And what we were able to do is look at what was more characteristic of our girls. And we found that they don't as often associate STEM with invention as they do for boys. We still would love to know more about other learners. We didn't have a sample size that allowed us to look beyond boys and girls. But when we get this kind of data, we immediately apply it to our programs. For another example, we were looking at the results of thousands of learners to help us better understand young the BIPOC inventors. And the research findings revealed some really interesting pieces to us. We found that some children really feel less comfortable sharing their thoughts and their ideas and their prototypes in front of the class. BIPOC learners had more anxiety, but when they were given a choice and how they were asked to share, their anxiety was reduced. So BIPOC learners reported, more than their white partners in regard to sharing, but sharing is so central to the invention process. So what we've been able to do is look at these results, and after they were uncovered, we can modify programming to ensure that all children feel safe when they're inventing, when they're creating, when they're sharing, and when they're pitching their ideas. So we ask all of our instructors now, we tell them about the research, and we ask them that anytime the curriculum prompts a child to share, that we give them a choice in how they share. We found a lot of different alternative ways. You can share in small groups, like a pair and share model. The students can share a visible model. They can share a PowerPoint. They can ask to collaborate with a peer, and the peer will present their ideas, gallery walks. I bet you have even more ideas. So I just wanted to provide this as a resource to you. On slide 5, I want to highlight another vital finding of Invention Education. So over the course of the last 10 or 15 years and working in schools, we hear a lot of concerns about Invention Education in the classroom. More than once, a superintendent has told me that they would love to do Invention Education, but they're so hyper-focused on ELA and math scores that it gatekeeps some of these processes and projects and experiences for students. But I believe that if we empower all students with Invention Education, that it actually supports those multifaceted academic gains. So we worked in partnership with Summit Education Initiative, which is a research-based nonprofit, and we analyzed the impact of out-of-school Invention Education programs on students. And what you see is some of that data here from one large school district. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see all of the elementary school students in that district. And when children experience Invention Education, what we found is that we can reduce and eliminate summer sled. So at Summit Education, that initiative studied Camp Invention participation. They found that across the board, attendance, GPA, their mathematics scores, their reading scores, they all moved. So among the children who attended Camp Invention, the mean number of absences dropped when comparing the last grading period of 2021 to 2022 school year with the grading period of the 2022 to 2023 school year. The mean GPA increased over that same time for those students who attended Camp Invention. The average iReady math percentile scores was above those children who did not attend other summer programs. The average iReady reading percentile was above those students who hadn't attended other summer programs. And I strongly believe, with the amazing researchers who are on this call, that collectively, we can justify Invention Education even to the most critical skeptic. Not every child will become an inventor, but what we know is certain: the tools of innovation can have a profound impact academically on all learners. And we're not done. There's so much work to be done, and others are doing similar work, and we're continuing to investigate that field. We're right now in the middle of the data collection phase. It's our most extensive research project to date. We're looking at 350 matched samples of learners across the country to help us continue to understand the field. And we've been so thankful to all of you who've helped us get here. And I just want to publicly thank Erin and the Lemelson Foundation for their commitment to this field. And together we'll all learn and grow. So thank you, Erin, and back to you.
Thanks, Alaina, and thanks, Ed. So we just want to take a pause for a moment here and go to a couple of questions in the chat. I'm noticing that there's a few coming in, and a few of them have been answered. Maybe the first question, Alaina, I'll just kick it back over to you. And it comes from Kathleen. What's been your favorite inventor experience at the National Inventors Hall of Fame?
Oh, that is a really great question. Oh, we get to bring a lot of our inventors to our school. So we have a school, it's a partnership with the Akron Public School System, the University of Akron, and our organization. So it's the first Invention School in the country that's the public institution, and we also have a high school. So when the students get a little experience, sometimes it could be a more intimate experience or a larger one, you know, we're seeing movement happen there. And we once took a panel of inventors to a school, and we were showing them our 3D printers and our laser cutters and our green screen and all of our cool tech. I mean, it's really cool tech. The school has cool tech. And Radia Perlman, who invented the spanning tree protocol, and she makes this call possible, the internet, the mother of the internet, as she's often called. She looked and she was like, I don't understand, why all this stuff? Just give them tools like hammers and nails and have them take things apart and see what's inside. And sometimes we get caught up on, you know, giving kids the latest tech, a dose of this, you know, new fandangled whatever. But the truth of what our inventors tell us is the creativity and the exploration are the linchpins. And so I would like to answer the question by talking about Radia's challenge to us as educators.
That's
we don't
great.
Have the coolest tech.
Thanks. And Ed, I noticed that you were smiling and kind of laughing when Alaina said that. I'm wondering if you have some reflections on that or additional thoughts.
Yeah, one of the things that I do with my students is we have a take-apart project. It is based on a mechanical engineering course at MIT, which is incredibly popular. When I first saw that, I was like, oh, wow, I do this all the time. I've done it since I was a kid. And why don't more people like that? Not everybody likes to take things apart, especially when they can't get put back together. But if something breaks, I want to know why it broke. How could it possibly have broken? Could I fix it? That's just curiosity, right? The nature of curiosity, and I think it's invaluable. It's a part of every year I teach. I take things apart. It's okay if they don't put them back together.
So another question for you, Ed, which you answered in the chat, but I'm wondering if you might expand on it. And there were a couple of comments from other folks in the chat as well. What do you do when a student or a team can't come up with an idea?
It happens, actually, I've been going through that right now. I have a class of seniors who is in the middle of trying to come up with their year-long project. And for some of them, it's really a struggle. They don't have a particular passion. So I have a lot of projects that are kind of in my back pocket. And so I'll suggest them, or, you know, I'll listen to what they say. I'll question them, plant some seeds. You know, I try to get as much information out of them as possible, because whatever it is, I don't want to give them a project, because then they may not like it. They'll be kind of half-heartedly working on it. It's just talking to them. The more I know them, by this time, I've known my students for about at least 3 years. So I kind of know what it is that they're into, what they like, and I kind of tailored my questioning and my suggestions to that end.
That's great. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who added their thoughts into the chat as well. We're going to have more time at the end. We've saved plenty of time at the end for questions. So as we continue through the presentations, keep adding your questions into the chat, and our speakers will do their best to answer them. Next, we're going to turn to Joanna Garner and Adam Maltese to talk about their work in Invention Education research. Joanna, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Erin, and thank you to the Lummelson Foundation and the USPTO and the Invented community for the opportunity to share with you tonight. And thanks to Ed and Alaina for such really wonderful examples of invention education. So I'm Joanna Garner. I'm from Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and we're going to spend a few minutes highlighting some of the topics and questions that invention education researchers have been thinking about. Then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into the topic of inventive identity, and then I'll hand it over to Adam. Next slide, please. So curiosity is already a big theme tonight. And here are some questions that our curious researchers and practitioners have been working on. There are lots of variations on these questions. So really what I'm presenting are thematic questions. These are some of the big ideas and questions and issues that working in invention education research that we are thinking about and tackling. So the first question is, who is likely to access and persist in the invention and innovation ecosystem, and why? And this is such an important question. So much has been written and talked about the lost opportunities that we face individually, as communities, as a nation, and globally as global citizens, if access to invention education opportunities are not broadened. So that's a big question. The second question is, how can invention education support students to affect change in their communities? So one of the standout components of invention education, as Ed highlighted, is this emphasis on problem finding, which allows students to notice and act on issues that matter to them and those around them. So how can invention education really support students to be agents of change in their own communities and in the broader world around them? And then a third question is, how can invention education develop students' academic strengths and their adaptive motivational mindsets? And this, I think, builds nicely on Alaina's presentation about how the National Inventors Hall of Fame education programs and Camp Invention are really thinking about what is the impact for students of participating in invention education programs. How does that impact their academic strengths? And also, and this is the topic that's close to my heart, how does it really help them with their sort of adaptive motivational mindsets and whether or not they come to think of themselves as inventive? So we'll come back to that in a moment. Next slide, please. So there are papers from all of the individuals that you see here and more who are not pictured in a resources folder that you'll be able to access at the conclusion of today's webinar. And what I wanted to do is just highlight a few of the growing invention education research community members that we have. Just like inventors, invention education researchers come from different disciplines, including STEM, educational and social equity, and the learning sciences. So we'll go from northwest, we'll go eastwards, and I just want to touch on the work of a few of the folks that you see here. So in the northwest is Adam Talamentis from Oregon State. He has written about invention education and how it positions youth as change agents, as a vehicle for community engagement and culturally responsive pedagogy. And that, of course, aligns with the concept of using knowledge to solve problems that are relevant and important to us in our communities. Jean Rayu's work at UCLA, she's published on how students, and in particularly students from historically underrepresented groups, frame their experiences and can frame failure as iterative design in making and tinkering environments. And this touches on research questions of broadening participation and how students can develop robust and resilient mindsets through invention education. Now we're moving east. We have Leslie Flynn at the University of Iowa. Leslie is a researcher and an entrepreneurship educator who has designed and developed national scale professional development programs and a portfolio assessment tool that helps us understand how students' innovation and STEM competencies grow and change over time. Moving east again, we have Adam, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. He has, among other things, explored the relations between creativity, problem-solving abilities, making, and inventiveness, and how these can manifest in the curriculum and in our pedagogy. And then below Adam, although she's in Georgia, is Roxanne Moore. Roxanne's research has included the development of models for K-12 innovation programming that's housed at a university. She's also investigated teachers' perspectives on the impacts of participation in invention challenges and reviewed a variety of STEM programs for similarities and differences with invention education. And this work in particular harkens back to that third research question that's concerned with pedagogy and the impacts of invention education on students' learning. Heading over to the East Coast on our map, we have Stephanie Couch and Lee Estabrooks and Audra Skukascape from University of Central Florida and from MIT, of course. They've been pioneers in understanding this question of broadening participation in invention, including individual and social and structural factors that support or impede participation by women in invention competitions and initiatives. They've also studied how students can reframe failure as part of the journey towards invention. Then Syracuse Professor Emerita Ruth Small's work has examined students' motivation for pursuing invention challenges and competitions, and she's also emphasized how school libraries and librarians, so not just classrooms and makerspaces, can support invention education. And then lastly is myself at Old Dominion University, and my research in the invention education space includes thinking about invention education as a context for identity exploration, whether that's in classrooms, in after-school or summer programs, or in museums. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to invite you to type into the chat. So if inventiveness includes actions that involve generating and developing and implementing new and original ideas in response to a perceived need of some kind, what does it mean to have an inventive identity? To think of yourself as an inventive person? What do you say? What do you believe? What do you know? So I'd like to invite you to put some thoughts in the chat, and then you can read each other's thoughts and we can talk about it a little bit. Okay, so I love this resilience and problem solving, not being afraid of failure, having a creative mindset, finding solutions. I love that. The world is your oyster, the sky is the moon, and trusting yourself. I love this. That's great. Failing forward and taking the first step. Yeah. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, these are great components of what could make us feel as if we have an inventive identity. So what I'd like to do is just sort of give you a brief overview of some of the assumptions and the main perspective that I bring to my research on inventive identity. And that is that we are motivated to act in a particular context as a way that manifests our identity, which is comprised of perceptions of who we are, our beliefs about the world and our role in it, our purposes and goals for taking action, and our perceived action possibilities. Those are the four inner circles that you see there in that DSMRI, that dynamic systems model of role identity there. So in essence, we do what we think we can under the circumstances, given who we believe ourselves to be in those circumstances. And this is a hot process, meaning that it's infused with emotions rather than just being a cold, rational, logical process. We've all failed and we've all had emotions surrounding that failure, right? It's also a situated process, meaning that it's subject to social and cultural factors that can support or get in the way of our perceptions of our own inventiveness and our ability to act in inventive ways. Next slide, please. So a person with an inventive identity might see themselves as possessing competencies, skills, and beliefs about the world and their role within it that support invention-oriented actions. They might experience a range of emotions during the invention and problem-solving process, but they strive to manage those emotions, perhaps by recalling prior instances of success, obtaining support from others, doing all the things that we do when we're experiencing frustration and emotion. Importantly, for us as invention education researchers, these inventive self-perceptions, these understandings of who we think we are, our beliefs about the world and what we can affect in the world, our purposes and goals for being inventive, and our perceived action possibilities, or what we think we can do, we want those to move across contexts, right? We don't want them to be stuck in one context. So next slide, please. And this is, in essence, what we're trying to do as educators, right? And as invention educators, we give students these meaningful experiences in the classroom or in the makerspace or in a studio. But really what we want is for them to take the learning of the content and turn it into learning about themselves so that they can move that into the world around them, move it into the world outside them. So if inventiveness is part of a person's identity, then the promotion of inventiveness, we can conceive of that as being identity change. So change in self-perception, change in purposes and goals, change in your beliefs about the world and your role in it, and change in action possibilities. And all of these things can change one another. If one changes, another changes. So think of a time when you stepped outside of your comfort zone. You did something, you took action that was outside of your comfort zone. And then did it help you think about yourself in a different way? Now I'm a person who fill in the blank, right? So that's what we're trying to do for our students. We want this to move across context. Next slide, please. So I want to hone in for a moment on self-perceptions as one component of an inventive identity and build a little bit on what Alaina was discussing when she was talking about the inventive mindset and the work that she did, the stories that were gathered from these inventors that were inaugurated into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. So this is based on some research that we did to understand how inventive self-perceptions appear in young students. These are elementary age students. And what we found was we were able to design a self-report tool, and you can see the items right there. The young students were able to reflect on their own self-perceptions of inventiveness. And we showed that it's a reliable and valid measure. And it kind of breaks down into two parts. One we called ingenuity, sort of flexibility, sharing ideas, being creative. And the other one being solution seeking, being open to new ideas, not giving up easily, being a problem solver, and making things better. And as Alaina alluded to earlier, we found that that could be kind of uncoupled from the way that students thought about their own STEM identity or their identification with STEM subjects. So this tells us that students are already thinking about inventiveness across contexts, right? And perhaps it's us as the adults that are kind of siloed in the way that we think about these things. So next slide, please. So I have one more brief question for you, and that is, how could you or do you design environments that support the development of students' inventive identity? What do you do, or what could you do? We'll give it 30 seconds or so. Pop it in the chat. Love this. I love all the strategies that are coming out here, having an inclusive environment, having a safe environment, accepting ideas, being open to ideas. Hackathons, having mentors that can guide the students. That's great. Valuing their real world experiences. Great point. Let's go to the next slide. This is my last slide. So there is research on how to support students' identity exploration. So identity exploration basically takes place when we think about ourselves as content. So we're not just learning content, we're also learning about ourselves. And there's a few things that we know about that. One being that it needs support to happen, right? It needs other people. It needs inventive context for us to do that in supportive context. And so some of the research that we did with Camp Invention and that program that Alaina was talking about earlier is we investigated how students felt about this environment. And indeed, they felt that it had 4 components that we know from research in other areas can support identity exploration and change. So specifically, learning environments that promote identity exploration are perceived to be self-relevant, and that's a huge pillar of invention education, right? That students see the work that they're doing as being relevant to other identities or contexts or roles that they have. They're solving problems for significant others in their lives, for example. The second principle is to encourage new ways of seeing the self and the world around you. So you awaken these new possibilities, not just a new skill, but you understand, you have that sort of metacognitive reflection that, oh, I am a person who can do this. And that's a really powerful thing for students. The third principle is to have an emotionally and psychologically safe environment. And that was something that Alaina had talked about in the realm of sharing, which is a huge component. Sharing out, we do that in classrooms all the time, and we do it in STEM and invention education. How can we do that so that students feel emotionally and psychologically safe to take a risk? And then the fourth one is inclusive of scaffolds or strategies, and you've listed many of them in the chat here, to assist in exploring content and exploring new aspects of themselves. So I'm going to leave you now with pondering how your learning environments can and do support this type of learning about content and learning about the self, and I'm going to pass it over to Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I appreciate being part of this group, and there's definitely many more people beyond me who could be here and contributing. Just as a touch of background, I'm a faculty member at Indiana University in the School of Education here. My work mostly over my time here has been focused on how people get interested in science and STEM more broadly. And at some point during that time, you sort of became aware of making and maker spaces. And beyond my research and teaching duties here, I also oversee a maker space that we have in the School of Education and a maker van that we have. And the purpose of those is to help educators and support educators in learning more about making and realize that they can do these sorts of things with the end goal of trying to get more kids and learners engaged in these types of experiences. So I gave a little bit of title to this section, which is that I'll talk to you a little bit about STEM and the importance of failure, which has also been talked about earlier in this call, and then thinking a little bit more about how those lead to invention. Of course, not always, but they can. And so next slide, please. So one of the things that I have thought of a lot, but tried not to derail my own progress in learning about invention education is, how unique is Invention Ed? There seems to be a lot of overlap. When I first came in, it was hard for me to distinguish the conversations we were having from ones that I was also having with people about maker education or STEM education. I think I was still relatively new to engineering education at that time, but similar conversations have been had there. And so, I think at some level, it's interesting to have this type of conversation. But at the same time, some people would say, well, how does it matter? And so, the way that I think about it is that there is absolutely overlap with the ideas of invention education, STEM education, computer science education, entrepreneurship, maker ed, engineering design, and a range of others. And I think that is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that a lot of the other fields that invention education overlaps with have deep roots, have long histories, and when things are similar, you can often learn from the work that has been done in those fields, the way they've conceptualized ideas. I have colleagues in engineering education who often look to science education as saying, well, you all have explored these ideas sort of first and are beyond or are deeper into them than we are in engineering education. And so I think there's some of that happens. On the other side, it can be challenging to determine where things are different. And then when you are different, you have to do some of that research yourself. And so ideas that we've been talking about in various conversations and even tonight related to accessibility for all learners, how you get people from different backgrounds to get started in this, to see value in this, how you have different on-ramps at different parts of the process, and all those sorts of things I think are important and things that we can learn from. I'll just take a second to sort of talk about the image that's here. It's nice and colorful. It is actually generated using an AI tool, but I was somewhat particular in what I was asking it to do, because I think that it somewhat represents, not perfectly, but somewhat represents the way I think of this issue of, and STEM education, again, I think, and maker education fall into this a lot, that there are a number of overlapping disciplines, sectors, fields, whatever we want to call them, that overlap. And often Joanna showed a nice Venn diagram before. Often we want to put them into sort of nice spaces, right? We want to say, oh, these overlap and there's this gap in the middle and that's invention education or something like that. But as I was starting to think about this in preparation for this call, I was thinking, I think it's messier than that. And I think that, sure, there are some sort of places where things overlap, but they're not all circles. They're little bits and pieces. That messiness is part of the fun and the interesting space that this is. And in certain areas, there's an additive effect. And that's what I tried to have shown in the diagram here a little bit is, sometimes it's not so much that you have to find the space where there's not, where there isn't overlap. But I think one of the interesting things about invention and some of these other transdisciplinary areas is that sometimes where there's that overlap is where there's sort of this really interesting value add space of a number of different fields converging or coming together, and that makes that area unique as a field of study, as something to do, and I think Invention Ed, fits that in some way. Next slide, please. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done in related areas, and I'm going to speed through this, so please feel free to reach out afterward or check out some of the papers that we have included in the resources that we'll share at the end here. Like I said, our group in particular has explored a number of topics related to making and engineering and problem solving in general. We have worked with families and caregivers, so kids and caregivers, in thinking about exposing them to engineering and how they might, how they engage in the engineering design process a lot, probably without knowing it, as they go throughout their lives and solve problems and come up with something to keep a door that wants to always swing closed. How they come up with something to keep it open, or deal with something else in their home. And so we've worked with some families there in trying to make them more aware that they can do these things and empower them to see issues in the world around them and try to make those issues make them better in some way to improve them. During the pandemic, we started a project called Co-Build 19, and that was a project to say, hey, we're all away from our maker spaces or our classrooms or our museums, but people can still do this, and the home environment is a great place for this. So we pulled together a team of our friends and put together a number of activities that tried to encourage kids to either alone or with their families to engage in making and STEM practices that would allow them to do those types of things, but without the need of fancy equipment or materials. Out of that, one of the ideas was we had originally ignored it because we didn't want to think about technology and the challenges or that would create, especially during a pandemic. But in the end, we decided to start this thing called Design with Code Club, and eventually that led to Girls Design with Code, and even a Latina edition of that, only in presented only in Spanish. And the whole idea there was, rather than thinking of the content the way we typically want, right? People should learn STEM, and oh, by the way, you can solve problems. People should learn computer science, and by the way, you can use this to do various things. Is flipping that around and saying, let's lead with the idea that people want to think about problems and challenges and issues, particularly girls, and let's use that as an entry point to then get to saying, well, you can solve some of these things with computer science or programming or engineering or other. And so that was, I would say that was rather successful and really quite engaging. So it worked the way that we wanted. And we're continuing to try to think about that and working with educators on getting them to think of it in those ways of, again, leading with the problem or the issue, and then thinking about making and a variety of other ways that people can get to develop skills to solve these issues. My machine is on here. This is a great project that we started. It has origins in Belgium and is in a number of places in Europe. But the basic idea here is, again, to really try to give kids a chance to engage in some authentic problems. And those authentic problem solving things can be fun. And so this is a fun one where elementary school kids come up with their dream machine. And through a little bit of a narrowing process, we take a couple of those dream machines, and those dream machines get passed on to my colleagues' university level design students. These students are just learning design, and they take those machines and they take these second graders and they treat them as their clients. And so they go through the design process and create designs for those kids. They get feedback from the kids, right? I've heard that they are the toughest clients you could ever imagine. And then those designs, after going through the ringer a little bit, get passed on to high school students, either those on a vocational track or those at least sort of developing maker skills. And those students sort of complete the build. And then it wraps back around and gets handed over to the elementary students again. Actually, from our project last year, we had, I think that school is actually going to look into learning more about the patenting process, because they at least want to take one of the projects down that road. And so again, for me, it's less about trying to come up with these inventions and these things that have never been designed before, and more about giving people something interesting to work on. Somebody asked before about, how do you help the kids who don't have ideas? And I think, sometimes you can go find other ideas that might engage them enough to get them interested in. And this is one of the ones that we're working on, and we're trying to figure out how we can expand this more broadly. And then case studies, we expected that there'd be a number of educators on the call. I know that one of the things that I faced as a teacher, and one of the things that I face now when we talk to a lot of teachers, is yeah, that's nice, that's interesting, but they have, so much equipment, or it would just never work in our school or whatever. And the case studies that we're going to work on are an attempt to say, you know what, these things can work in this type of education, can work in a variety of environments. And so it's trying to get people who have sort of had success in a variety of environments to write those case studies down, and then to share them more broadly with the educators that we know across the world who would be looking for some idea seeds, right? And some ideas for how they can implement those sorts of things in their school or in their district or in their museum. So that's a lot of background. Two other things I want to get to here. We have two other projects that are ongoing right now, and those are, one is about inventive problem solving, and one is about failure. In the inventive problem solving project, like we've talked about on this call, we for a number of years have been thinking, okay, there's sort of a mismatch between what we think is needed for kids, what we hear employers say is needed for kids, what we have people talk about related to invention, and then what we think is really happening in schools. And not for anyone's fault, other than policies and those sorts of things that are constraining a lot of what can be done in schools. And there's a mismatch there, right? And I have a spiel that probably everyone that I know on this call has heard before, which is basically that the type of education we're doing right now often leads to sort of good performance, maybe, or some sort of performance on tests, but that I don't think equates to inventive mindset development and inventive problem solving. So we are starting a project, or in the middle of a project now, where we pulled together a group of experts from around the US, from a variety of backgrounds. So K-12 educators, those who hire talent into industry, those who have patents, those who create new materials at my university and other universities, those who might be IP attorneys, and we are basically asking those people, what do kids need to be inventive problem solvers? And the idea is that there are a number of lists out there, right? Many schools or districts have these learner profiles that they've spent a lot of time on. But even though those are good, oftentimes they're sort of a single word, right? Or a very simple idea. And it's sometimes hard for an entire district or set of teachers or even a single teacher to look and say, okay, my district wants me to focus on developing creativity. What do I do? How do I do that? And so we're at the early stages of a longer project where we're hoping that by working with experts, getting these terms defined in sufficient enough depth, we will then be able to do probably two things. One is be able to evaluate whether or not these types of things are happening in these spaces. And if we sort of use backward design approaches, we can then go out to educators and work with them to more thoughtfully design learning that supports the development of these capacities, we're calling them. So again, we're in the early stages there, but it's showing a lot of interesting stuff and definitely showing ideas that are beyond any single list of 21st century skills or other sets of skills like those that we've seen so far. Failure is another love of mine now. I fail all the time, and thankfully I can smile more about it now. We've sort of evolved a little bit in the way that we think about it, but we still keep the same core definition, which is really that failure is when something doesn't work as intended, right? So it's pretty simple, but it's something that many people that we talk with agree on. And the way we started was we were investigating making, and we were looking at how kids make and what happens when things don't work out. And then what do educators do in those moments? We saw some educators who would just jump in and fix something, right? We saw other educators who maybe asked a lot of questions and the student never got out of that sort of cycle of failure and left frustrated. And we saw really a whole range. And so we became very interested in this, and we were also looking in sort of in school contexts, like after school environment, and then museum or free choice type of environments. We were seeing similarities, but some differences. The most notable being, in a school context, testing and that type of failure is definitely more prevalent on kids' minds than in a museum context. But this type of education and learning that we are all talking about here is rife with failure. And some people might not call it failure, but at least for us, it's definitely there. And it really creates an interesting opportunity for people to learn from and to realize, not everything in the world is going to be a success. And of course, you can find all sorts of quotes to that effect. And so after learning a lot of that, we saw that we wanted to focus on educators and how they're supporting kids. And so in our current project, we're working with museum educators who do a lot of making, tinkering programs. And we're working with them on ways that they can support their learners through failure. And we're using really a reflective practice as the focus. So if you're reflective about what's going on in these practices, you can think about what's happening with your learners, and then support them in the best way that's going to be most useful for them. And so so we're doing that now. And in that project, what's very interesting is that there has been a lot of the educators, thinking about their own failure. And so we're finding that that adults have a tough time of getting their own concerns about failure sort of out on the table, getting them dealt with, and then being able to think about how they can focus on the kids through these moments. And so with that, I'll sort of move on to the final bit here in the next slide. And I just wanted to talk through a little bit of some of our learnings. I've shared some of this before, and I'm talking longer than I should, but I appreciate you all still hanging out with us. A couple of things, and again, some of these have been mentioned before. So problem identification is challenging. Problem scoping is challenging. if you talk to a lot of people who do this work, they will say this: we didn't know it until we saw it. One of the things that we tried to do to make that better is to create a problem bank. And the idea with the problem bank, which is a website that we have, is to try to find problems that exist out in the community, get people to articulate those problems, and put them up on the site, and then do some matchmaking with educators around the country who might see those problems as opportunities and want their kids to work with them. So, an organization needs a website developed. Well, there's probably classes out there who are looking to gain those skills. So we're trying to create this site that will create a matchmaking service there. We talked a bit about diversity before. We can talk about that a lot more, but thinking about how to make things accessible and approachable for different groups, whatever their background is, whatever their skill set is, whatever languages they're bringing, whatever physical or cognitive abilities they're bringing. If we want them to participate in this process, really thinking about how we can work with them and make things accessible. The third point there is that differentiation is key and having multiple on-ramps. So I've got just two examples here. I'll just mention the TechRise one. I love this project. I love the idea that basically, in order to participate, you don't need to have created a prototype that works. You don't need to have sort of gone beyond. You have to have the idea. And if your idea is one of the better ones, then they take that idea and they will support you to sort of make it a reality. And so thinking about, not everyone is the STEM expert or the STEM star or who has this awesome idea for invention. How can you get other people sort of, on the road and on the pathway toward that? So thinking, inventively and creatively about how you can do that. And then the final one, this has been mentioned, but this idea of risk, fail, and repeat. So you have to work on taking these opportunities and taking chances. It's definitely going to lead to some failure along the way, but that process gets easier over time, generally speaking. What we saw was that kids are generally okay with failure, so you shouldn't just lump it on them that they're afraid of it. It's the adults who are not. So try to back off and sort of put your fear of failure on the side. And Ed had mentioned this before, but this idea, particularly in this book, Catching Fire, from NASA, that they were viewing failure, at least at the time of the Apollo missions, as failures helped them learn all the ways that things could go wrong so that they could troubleshoot those. And then those were sort of one less thing that might go wrong that they weren't prepared for. So it was seen as a tool toward preparation. And so, again, I've talked too long. I will stop there and I'll pass it over to Alaina.
Thank you. That was really, really powerful, Adam. I really loved hearing about that failure cycle from your perspective, because I really resonate with that. You said kids are okay with failure and adults are not. And I have had this experience a few different times, but one that really presses on me is I had a scenario where I was interviewing Art Fry and Spencer Silver, who are the co-inventors of the Post-it note. And many textbooks have depicted their innovation as being a failure or an accident. So I wanted to get them on camera talking about this. And I spent so much time prompting them, and they said everything but failure. And my perspective as a practitioner and someone who spent a lot of time in the classroom is we see failure in this very narrow lens. But when our inventors talk about failure, they don't use the word failure, and instead they replace it with words like serendipity. So it's very cool for you to bring this up. And it was also really powerful to see, you, Adam, with Jean and Leslie and Roxanne and Stephanie and Ruth and Audra and Lee and Joanna all on one screen. You're such a powerhouse for the field. And I feel like I speak on behalf of all practitioners when I say thank you for making this your life's work. I think the learnings that you've all made together have really transformed the field. And I can tell from tonight's chat, everyone collectively here really values collaboration. Even looking at your AI generated image a moment ago, Adam, that overlap of what that additive effect, as you called it, or invention education is transdisciplinary. And it is what many are calling that convergent practice. And when practitioners collaborate with third-party researchers and also collaborate with organizations like Lemelson, and of course, the USPTO, it allows us as practitioners to gauge our program's effectiveness, but that also has a marked transformation for student outcomes. It gives students confidence, and it provides them this unique invention identity that I think, as Stephanie said in the chat, is powerful, and it is a diverse field as a whole. We, as practitioners, cannot always do our own research, but we get to tap into this global work, and together we'll continue to advance the field. If you want one last proof, check out this peer-reviewed journal article. It showcases some of the recent learnings that Dr. Garner has done in the field, and I want to take this last moment that I have with you to leave you with this notion. I believe together it's possible to provide accessibility and inclusivity and share these proven invention education practices. Together, I believe that we can revolutionize the structure, the process, the landscape of invention education, and we can make sweeping evolutions for learners who get to participate in these experiences. If we're strategic and if we're working in unison and together, I think we'll impact millions of kids.
Thanks, Alaina. Like I said in the chat, I can only echo what you just said. It is, it's a huge honor to be here tonight and to have all of you in the InventEd community contributing your insights and your perspectives and all of your hard work. And to everyone joining us as a participant tonight, sharing your insights and your perspectives and your experiences. It's great to see this community growing and connecting and finding these points of intersection. It's huge. Before we actually get to questions, Kathleen, if you don't mind just jumping ahead to the next slide. We could talk for another hour on this topic, but we only have about 10 minutes left, and then you can go back to your evenings. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of resources for you if were inspired by what you heard today. The bit.ly link here will allow you to access resources mentioned during this presentation tonight. So be sure to, thanks Kathleen for putting that in the chat. Be sure to click on that, copy it, and then you have access to a folder of resources on Invention Education. I know many of you who are on the call tonight already know about inventioneducation.org. If you haven't checked it out, feel free. You can find recent news there. We have a bank of curricula from all of our partners in the invention education space. So a lot of folks here, a lot of folks joining us as participants tonight. White papers, testimonials from educators, stories from students, and then you can also sign up for our newsletter there as well to stay up on all the news in invention education. So with the time that we have left, Kathleen, I'm going to hand it back over to you. I know that we had some questions come in, and I'm wondering if there were some questions that stood out to you that we might turn to.
Sure, let's take a look here. One thing that came up here at the end of the chat is asking about grants and other funding opportunities to get started with these programs. Can you speak to that?
Might I take
Yeah, go ahead, Alaina. Go for it.
Yeah, so we've been very, very fortunate to have had support from, the Lemelson Foundation and others. And you're absolutely right. In order to provide experiences for students, we have to make it a very important part of our work to find those resources. And while they are out there, it does require a focus. And there's not one agency producing all of the, the monies to do this work, but collectively there are other groups, that can help support. I know for us, it was, with prompting from the USPTO to help provide equitable experiences. And it took us years to get to the point where we were serving half of our students from low SES communities. So I don't have the magic key, but there is money available if you continue to look. And maybe others on this call, Erin might have more to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so if any of our other presenters have any perspectives, but I think this is a question we can also toss back out to our participants tonight. I know a number of you have been successful in getting grant funding for your programs. So if you have thoughts or just tips, it doesn't have to be specific agencies or funders, but if you have thoughts and tips on how to find out and how to make those connections around funding, please put your thoughts and comments in the chat. I think this is certainly an area where we need to open up and have more open conversation about how we get support and bring attention to invention education.
Thank you. Adam, Joyce is interested in hearing more about your work with families. How do you engage the families in this process in student invention education and learning?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joyce. I'll make this very short since I went over my time by a lot. We started the project with really wanting to get families a little bit aware of the engineering design process, and then jump relatively quickly into them sort of picking a problem, or we don't always want to frame it as a problem. A thing in their home, in their community, in their schools that they're interested in working on. And what we found was that there was this a little bit of a struggle in sort of, they often wanted to pick problems that were these big, huge problems, were really technically challenging. And while the kids were good at picking those problems, they often didn't want to hear that there might be a simple solution. And so, so going back to the example of keeping a door open, they didn't want to hear that there's there's a thing you can wedge under the door and it'll keep it open, right? They wanted a door holding robot, to be at play there. And so, so we found that sort of this idea of scoping, finding support in the community from engineers and roboticists and those folks was really helpful. And really where we ended up was, we don't have to get that far, right? By really sort of doing some basic things of getting them to explore this space and thinking about the things that they're often doing to solve some of these problems, that was sort of the best way to get them on the ramp toward thinking about this. So I think that there's probably a nice sequence where you can get people going on this, and then you could probably bring in some of the programs we talked about tonight or other resources, and probably many of the ones that USPTO has that will help them sort of move through those levels to get to that next step.
All right, thank you. Ed, Ezekiel had a question for you about the tools that you use and how do you deal with OSHA compliance?
As far as I know, we've never really had to directly comply with OSHA, and there's been kind of conflicting information as to whether or not schools are completely exempt from that. But I know that historically, as the pendulum swung one way where everybody was going to Harvard and nobody wanted a hands-on education, litigation was kind of something that was brought up. But I haven't had to worry about it. Knock on wood. As far as the tools, gosh, it could be from as simple as a set of hand tools. 3D modeling is really one that's almost a requirement now for any sort of a STEM or hands-on education, and a 3D printer, right? Beyond that, you can just grow it whether it be small woodworking, small metalworking. You don't have to have a full-on makerspace in order to really get a bunch of things going. So you can start with a small set of hand tools, but definitely 3D modeling by far is for us the biggest tool.
That's great. Alaina, I have a question for you. This is my own question. Let's say I wanted to start a camp invention in my area. How can I do that? What's the process to do that? Is it easy?
Yeah, it's very easy. We sign schools on every year, and they come to us every month of the year in different parts of the country. We have programs in all 50 states, and we have a dedicated team to help support and collaborate with your district. And even often my colleagues are, I feel like, some of the best in the world. So I'm sorry to not be humble here, but they have even been able to find money to support these programs in schools across the country. So some of what we're able to do is connect funders with the school and then give the program in the middle. So you can reach out. Our website is easy. I'll stick it in chat. It's invent.org. And there's an educator tab there. And if you reach out, we'll be glad to help support you and listen to you about the work that you're doing and figure out what solution might help start your journey and then help you continue the journey so that it's not just you looking at making curriculum on your own at the end of the full work day, but we spend all year building invention education programming so that you can do the good work.
That's great. So this last question is for whoever wants to tackle it. As a person who works at the patent office, of course, I have to ask about the intellectual property piece of it. And Alvin had a question about how innovation, the things that we're doing in the classroom, how do you make that interdisciplinary with things like the legal aspects of it and entrepreneurship, all of those pieces? How do you make them all tie together, especially in relationship to how do you teach these kids what intellectual property is and why it's important?
In my case, I make it a specific lesson, right, where we have to do patent searches. I explain what patents are, the differences between patents, copyrights, trademarks, all that good stuff. In part because I had a very negative experience at the very beginning of my teaching career, where I had a patent troll kind of see something one of my students put together and threatened to sue our district. That kind of just woke me up and got me to learn a little bit more about this, and if nothing else, to realize where I stand as an educator when IP is generated by the students. Every district has their own way of handling that. Colleges have their own way of handling that, as well as companies. But I make that an integral part, just because they will run into that at one time or another in their careers.
You're absolutely right about that. It's kids. I think kids don't think about the all the IP that's in everything that they use. So when they are modifying something, they're modifying somebody else's IP. Well, thank you all for answering the questions. And Erin, did you want to close it out for us tonight?
Just to echo you, Kathleen, and say thanks to all of our presenters and to you as PTO for giving us the opportunity to connect. It's great to see all of you on the chat, and thanks so much for your great comments and great ideas. And I'll toss it back over to you, Kathleen, if you have any further announcements.
I did want to add that I dropped some links for some USPTO resources into the chat as well. The first link is to our education page. From there, you can branch out to our kids and educators pages, as well as Equip HQ, which is our platform that has resources for teaching your kids all about intellectual property, which is what Invention is all about, creating that intellectual property. All right. Thank you so much for answering all these questions and for giving us such an engaging presentation. I have to say, this has been very motivational for me, so I hope it was for everybody else as well.